The night was quiet in Boston, the kind of stillness that only came after the city had gone to sleep. Michael, a 42-year-old literature professor, sat at his desk surrounded by stacks of essays. His apartment was modest, lined with bookshelves. Papers spread across the table, and the soft hum of a desk lamp casting a warm glow. He was tired but too restless to sleep, so he poured himself a cup of tea and leaned back in his chair, ready to push through a few more essays before bed. Then came the knock. It was sharp, quick, and startling against the silence of the night. Michael froze. He rarely had visitors, and certainly not at this hour. His first thought was that it must be a neighbor needing help. Maybe something was wrong with the building. He hesitated, setting down his pen, his heartbeat quickening with curiosity and a trace of unease. When he opened the door, the last person he expected to see was standing there. Emma. She was one of his students. 24, bright, thoughtful, and always engaged in class. Tonight, though, she looked completely different. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying, and her hands clutched the collar of her coat tightly as though holding herself together. Her hair was damp from the light drizzle outside, and her face carried the fragile look of someone who had reached a breaking point. "Professor," she said softly, her voice barely steady, "I didn't know where else to go." Michael stood still, caught between surprise and concern. 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Why was she here? Why now? What had happened? But the way she looked at him, with a mixture of desperation and trust, left no room for hesitation. "Come inside," he said gently, stepping aside. Emma entered slowly, her steps uncertain, as if she wasn't sure she had made the right decision. The warmth of the apartment seemed to relax her just a little, but she still kept her arms folded, her shoulders tense. Michael closed the door behind her, trying to read her expression, trying to understand what had driven her here in the middle of the night. He offered her a seat at the small dining table, the only clear space not covered in papers. "Let me get you some tea," he said, not waiting for her answer. He moved quickly to the kitchen, giving her a moment to breathe, to gather herself. When he returned, she was sitting stiffly, her eyes cast downward, her hands gripping each other tightly. He placed the cup in front of her, and she looked up with a faint smile of gratitude before wrapping her hands around it, almost as if the warmth itself was what she needed most. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. Michael wanted to ask what had happened, but he knew better than to press too soon. He could see she was carrying something heavy, and whatever it was, it had brought her here to him tonight. Finally, Emma broke the silence. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "I didn't mean to bother you. I couldn't be alone tonight." Michael felt a wave of sympathy rise inside him. He knew loneliness well, the kind that made nights feel endless, the kind that pushed people to seek out light wherever they could find it. And here she was, seeking his light, his company, his listening ear. "You're not bothering me," he said softly. "I'm just surprised to see you here." Her eyes flickered with embarrassment, and she looked down at her cup. "I almost didn't come, but I didn't know where else to go. I didn't want to call anyone, and I just thought of you." The honesty in her words struck him deeply. It wasn't just that she had shown up, was that she trusted him enough too. Michael's role as her professor made the moment even more delicate. But beyond that, he saw her as a young woman carrying something she couldn't hold alone anymore. The night outside was still, but inside his apartment the air felt charged with something unspoken in intensity that neither of them named. Michael sat across from her, watching her quietly. Waiting for her to continue, Emma brushed her hair back, her fingers trembling slightly. She took a sip of tea, her breath uneven. "It's been a hard few weeks. I thought I could handle it, but tonight everything felt too heavy. I just started walking, and somehow I ended up here." Michael listened closely, nodding, his chest tightening at the vulnerability in her words. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. The weight of her loneliness was clear enough. The clock ticked past midnight, marking the start of a night unlike any other Michael had lived. He had invited a student into his home before, but never like this. Never under these circumstances. And though no rules had been broken, he knew this was different as he looked at her across the table. Lit softly by the glow of the lamp, he realized this moment would change something. He didn't know how, and he didn't know where it would lead. But he felt it's the undeniable truth that this night was the beginning of something he would never forget. Emma's presence lingered in the air, fragile yet powerful, like the pause before a storm or the silence before music begins. Michael leaned back slightly, his heart heavy with questions, but also touched by the fact that, in her most vulnerable hour, she had chosen to come to him. The night stretched on, and the city outside remained asleep. But in Michael's apartment, a story was just beginning, one that neither of them had expected. One that would leave a mark on both of their lives forever. The room was quiet, the tea steaming gently between them. Michael sat across from Emma, watching her struggle to put her thoughts into words. Her shoulders were tense, her hands wrapped around the cup as if holding onto it for strength. He could see she wanted to speak but didn't know where to start. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. "I've been feeling so lost lately." Her words came out shaky, but once spoken, they seemed to push more out of her. "I moved here thinking I could handle everything: school, work, being on my own, but it's harder than I imagined. Everyone around me seems to have it all together, and I feel like I'm barely holding on." Michael listened carefully, his heart heavy as he took in her words. He had seen her in class many times, always sharp, always confident when she spoke about literature. But now he was seeing another side of her. One that wasn't visible in the bright classroom lights. Emma went on, her voice trembling. "Tonight, I just couldn't take the silence in my apartment anymore. It felt too big, too empty. I started walking and somehow I ended up here. I don't even know why, but I just felt like I could talk to you." Her eyes met his for the first time since she entered. And Michael felt the weight of that look. There was trust in her gaze, but also a quiet plea, as if she was asking him not to turn her away. "You can always talk to me," he said gently. The words slipped out before he even thought about them. They felt natural, honest, the kind of promise he could keep. Emma gave a small, broken laugh. "You probably think I'm ridiculous. A grown woman coming to her professor in the middle of the night because she can't handle being alone." Michael shook his head firmly. "I don't think that at all. Everyone needs someone sometimes. There's nothing ridiculous about that." Her expression softened, as if those words had given her permission to breathe. She leaned back in her chair, her hands loosening on the cup. For the first time, her voice steadied. "In class, you always talk about how books aren't just stories but mirrors. How they show us who we are. I think that's what I wanted tonight. A mirror. Someone who could see me when I felt invisible." The way she said it made Michael pause. He had taught literature for years, told hundreds of students that stories reveal the truth we hide. But hearing her repeat those words back to him, applying them to her own life, touched him in a way he didn't expect. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "Not to me." Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment she looked as if she might cry again. But instead, she smiled faintly. A fragile smile that carried more gratitude than words ever could. Michael wanted to reach across the table, place his hand over hers, and reassure her. But he stopped himself. He knew the boundaries, knew the fine line between comfort and something more. So instead, he leaned forward and spoke with quiet honesty. "Emma, life can be heavy, especially when you're trying to carry it alone. But you don't have to. Not tonight." The words seemed to settle into her, calming her restless energy. She let out a deep breath, as though letting go of a weight she had been holding for weeks. "You don't know how much it means to hear that," she whispered. The conversation flowed more easily after that. She told him about the long hours she spent working to cover her bills, how she barely had time to call her family back home. She confessed how sometimes she stayed up late scrolling through her phone, watching other people's lives and wondering why hers felt so small and lonely. Michael listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving hers. Every word she shared revealed a piece of her he hadn't seen before: her doubts, her fears, her hidden strength in enduring it all. He felt honored in a way that she trusted him enough to show this vulnerable side. When she finally grew quiet, she looked at him with hesitation, as if she wasn't sure if she had said too much. But Michael gave her a reassuring nod. "Thank you for trusting me with all of that," he said sincerely. She tilted her head, studying him. "Why do you always sound so calm? Even now when I'm falling apart, you look like you're steady." "I think that's why I came here. Because I feel safe when you talk." The admission struck him deeply. He had always tried to be steady for his students, to give them a sense of stability in their chaotic lives. But hearing that she felt safe because of him was different. It was personal, intimate, and it stirred something inside him he couldn't easily name. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "Maybe it's because I've had my share of falling apart too. I just learned how to hide it better." Her eyes softened and she gave a small, genuine smile. "So you're human after all." Michael laughed quietly, the sound breaking some of the heaviness in the room. "Very human," he admitted. The clock on the wall ticked toward 1 in the morning, but neither of them seemed to notice. Their conversation had moved past the formality of professor and student. It was two people sitting in the quiet of the night, sharing truths they might never have spoken in daylight. Emma leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Have you ever felt like you're living two lives? The one everyone sees, and the one you keep hidden?" Michael's breath caught. The question was simple, but it carried weight. He thought of the nights he spent grading papers alone, the times he had walked through the city feeling invisible. It's painful. The regrets he carried quietly in his chest. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low. "I think we all do. The challenge is finding someone who sees both lives and doesn't walk away." For a long moment, Emma just looked at him. There was silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was filled with understanding, with something unspoken that connected them in a way words couldn't. Michael felt the shift, subtle but undeniable. Tonight wasn't about lectures or essays. It wasn't about rules or roles. It was about two people crossing paths at the exact moment they needed each other most. And as the night deepened, Michael realized the truth. This visit was not about fixing everything for Emma. It was about being present, about giving her a space to be seen and heard. And in that act, he found himself feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet ache of being needed. That realization lingered in the room, a soft and powerful presence neither of them could ignore. The night was far from over, and both of them knew it. Something important had just begun. The clock pushed past midnight, but time seemed to have lost its meaning. Michael and Emma sat across from each other, the lamplight softening the room, casting long shadows against the walls. Their conversation had shifted from loneliness to dreams, from the weight of silence to the fragile hope of belonging. Michael could feel the air changing, less heavy now, but charged with something delicate, something unspoken that pressed closer with every passing second. Emma leaned back in her chair, her hands no longer trembling. For the first time since she had walked in, there was calm in her face, though her eyes still carried a quiet ache. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "if I'm chasing something I'll never find. A place where I fit, a life that feels right." Michael tilted his head, studying her. He had seen those same questions in his own reflection more times than he could admit. "Maybe we don't find it all at once," he replied. "Maybe we discover it piece by piece. In the people who make us feel seen." Her eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, she looked at him as if he had just given her an answer she'd been searching for. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with understanding. Outside, the rain had stopped, but drops still clung to the window, catching the dim glow of the streetlight. Inside, the air felt warm, as though the walls themselves were holding in the fragile connection that had grown between them. Emma shifted slightly, leaning forward. "Do you ever feel," she asked slowly, "like your life took a path you didn't choose? Like you're living one story, but another was waiting for you?" Michael felt that question settle deep inside him. He thought of the choices he'd made staying in academia, giving up certain dreams for stability, convincing himself that solitude was easier than risking heartbreak again. He thought of the nights he had sat alone, wishing for someone to simply knock on his door. And now here she was. Yes, he admitted, his voice low. More often than I'd like to say, their eyes locked, and for the first time, Michael didn't look away. The classroom walls were gone, the titles of professor and student vanished. In this moment, they were simply two people, searching for something neither could name. Emma's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, she let the silence stretch, her gaze lingering on him. Michael felt his chest tighten, his heart beating faster than he wanted it to. He knew the boundary lines, the unspoken rules that guided his world. Yet, sitting here, those lines felt less like walls and more like threads thin, fragile and easily broken. He leaned back slightly, trying to steady himself, but Emma's voice pulled him forward again. "You know what's strange?" she whispered. "I don't feel afraid right now. This is so unexpected. But I don't." Michael swallowed hard. "Neither do I." The truth of it hung between them. There was no fear, only the raw awareness of connections, something deeper than admiration, something tenderer than friendship. It wasn't physical, wasn't spoken, but it was undeniable. The room grew still. The ticking clock faded into the background and the world outside disappeared. All that remained was the steady glow of the lamp, the quiet breath between them, and the unspoken pull that neither of them wanted to admit out loud. Emma's hand rested on the table. Her fingers curled around her cup, but not tightly this time. Michael's eyes drifted to that hand, and for a second he imagined reaching out, closing the distance. He didn't move, but the thought alone stirred something deep within him. Her voice broke the silence. "Have you ever felt like your whole life could change in a single night?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He thought of it how ordinary the night had started, just another stack of essays and another cup of tea. And now it felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. "Yes," he said softly, "I feel it now." Emma's eyes widened just slightly, as though she hadn't expected him to answer that way. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression caught between surprise and recognition. Then, slowly, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, gentle, almost shy, but full of meaning. The connection deepened. And Michael felt himself standing on the edge of something dangerous, yet beautiful. He wanted to protect her, to keep this moment pure, but he couldn't deny the quiet pull inside him. Emma leaned back again, breaking the intensity just slightly, though her gaze never wavered. "I don't know what tomorrow will look like," she admitted, her voice trembling now, but not with fear, with honesty. "But I'll remember tonight." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "So will I." The moment lingered, fragile but powerful. Neither of them crossed the line, but both knew they had stepped into a new space, one where feelings lived quietly between words. As the hour crept closer to dawn, the lamp flickered faintly, and Emma looked toward the window. The city outside was still asleep, but inside, the two of them had already lived through a night that felt larger than time. Michael felt the weight of responsibility pressing against the pull of emotion, but for once he didn't push it away. He allowed himself to feel it just for this night. Emma's voice came softly, almost like a secret. "Whatever happens after this, thank you for letting me be here, for listening." Michael's heart swelled at her words. He wanted to say more, to tell her how much this night had meant to him, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply gave her a look, one she seemed to understand. The truth was clear. Even if unspoken, this night, this connection, would stay with both of them forever. And though the boundaries remained, though nothing had been crossed, Michael knew the moment of truth had come, not in action, but in the recognition of what their hearts had quietly revealed. The night was not over yet, but its meaning had already been sealed. Something had shifted, and nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds, painting soft streaks of gold across the walls. Michael hadn't noticed how late or how early it had become. The night had slipped away while he and Emma talked, shared silences, and discovered pieces of themselves that had been hidden until now. Emma sat quietly, her coat draped across her lap, her tea long gone cold. She looked calmer, different from the trembling young woman who had knocked on his door hours earlier. There was still sadness in her eyes, but now it was gentler, softened by the comfort of being heard. Michael stood and walked to the window. The city outside was just beginning to stir. Cars hummed faintly in the distance, and the glow of the street lamps was giving way to morning. He turned back to her, realizing their night together was ending, though neither of them seemed ready for it. "You should probably get some rest," he said quietly, not wanting to break the fragile peace that hung between them. Emma nodded but didn't move. She seemed to be gathering her strength, as if leaving meant closing the book on something she wasn't sure she wanted to end. Finally, she rose, slipping on her coat, her movements slow, deliberate. Michael walked her to the door. The hallway was silent, just as it had been when she first arrived, but everything between them had changed. He reached for the handle, hesitating. He wanted to say something more, something lasting. But the right words refused to come. Emma turned to him, her expression soft. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me stay, for listening, for not making me feel foolish." Her gratitude was simple, but Michael felt its weight. He gave her a small nod. "You were never foolish. And you're stronger than you think, Emma. Don't forget that for a moment." They just stood there, the morning light touching both of their faces. Then, as she reached for the door, her hand brushed against his. It was not planned, not even deliberate, just a fleeting touch. But in that brief second, it carried everything they hadn't said. Neither of them spoke about it. They didn't need to. The silence held the truth. Emma stepped into the hallway, pausing to look back at him one last time. "This night, I'll remember it," she said softly, her voice steady now. Not because it was perfect, but because it felt real. Michael's chest tightened, but he managed a small smile. "So will I." And then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the stairs, leaving Michael standing alone at the doorway. He closed it slowly, leaning against the frame for a moment, his mind replaying everything that had happened: the knock, the tears, the confessions, the silences, the trust. He moved back into the apartment, the lamp still glowing faintly, the half-finished essays scattered across the desk. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. The night had shifted something inside him, something he knew he couldn't ignore. It wasn't about rules or roles or what might come next. It was about a moment a night where two lonely hearts had found comfort in each other's presence. No lines had been crossed, no promises made. But the connection was undeniable. And it had changed him. Michael sat back down at the table, staring at Emma's empty cup. He thought of her words, of the way she had admitted her fears, of the way she had looked at him with trust and honesty. And he realized that the memory of this night would stay with him, not as a temptation, but as a reminder of what it meant to truly be present for another person. As the sun climbed higher, he finally stood and drew back the curtains. Light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows of the night. He took a deep breath, feeling both heavy and light at the same time. Heavy with the weight of what he felt but could not name. Light with the knowledge that he had been part of something meaningful, something that would never leave him. For Emma, he knew this night would be a memory of safety, of being seen when she felt invisible. For him, it would be a reminder that life could shift in unexpected ways, that sometimes the most powerful moments were not about what was done, but about what was shared. Michael gathered the essays again, though his focus was far from them. His thoughts kept drifting back to the sound of her voice, the way her hand had brushed his, the look in her eyes as she said goodbye. It wasn't love, not yet, and maybe not ever, but it was something real. And that was enough. The day began outside his window, ordinary and unchanged. But Michael knew he would carry the memory of that night quietly in his heart, not because of what could have happened, but because of what had trust, honesty, and a fragile connection that had reminded him and her that no one was ever truly invisible. And so The night ended not with grand gestures or dramatic promises, but with something much stronger, a moment that would linger, a memory that would stay, and a truth he would never forget.